Hey guys, it's Yaritza. Welcome to episode 4 of Ask Yaritza. I have a special guest with me today, Walter Greason. Walter, how are you?
Oh, I'm so blessed to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show. This is spectacular.
So, guys, I don't know if you've ever heard of Walter before. I love Walter from the first time we've been on a panel discussion. He's a historian, he's an educator, he's an urbanist. If you haven't read his Wakanda Syllabus yet, I'm telling you, you're going to want to get into it. You can just literally Google his name and all of his YouTube videos pop up. I love it. I love it. And I'm so happy that he's here with me today because we have a very important topic to discuss. So, Walter, are you ready?
I'm ready.
So,
Let's go and do it.
let me actually introduce to everyone exactly what the scenario is. So, we have a teacher who teaches in a rural community, 98% white students, 65% poverty level. She was teaching Maya Angelou's autobiography, and she had one student who made a mockery out of racism. The teacher didn't know exactly, how to have this conversation, but also what kind of strategies or activities can she implement that so that these conversations can be very authentic and open in the classroom. So, what are some suggestions you have for this teacher?
Up front, I mean, this happens all across the country, and it's something I've had to specialize in for almost 25 years. Students who doubt the reality of any kind of systemic oppression, but especially racism. And so one of the things I try to really that's worked for me, in any case, is that if I help them understand the ways people are discriminated against based on religion or based on their language, all of a sudden that starts to open the door and break the ice that they're like, oh, that is real. I have seen something like that. And so those kinds of conversations where they seen something like it in their family and can share a personal story starts to say, okay, well, we can take this seriously. And this isn't just something that's outside of my experience that I don't know anything about, and I don't really want to try and reach out and understand it.
So that makes so much sense, and I never actually thought about it that way. I usually just think about racism, and I'm like, let's have this discussion, let's jump on it head on. And maybe it's because I have older students, so it's almost like you're old enough to understand this concept of racism and how detrimental it could be to anyone. So I'm glad you said that because Amplifier and also Wanderopolis have such great activities where it enables the students to actually look at both sides. So what is a civil right, or can you see both sides of an issue, even topics like Hispanic versus Latino. And so you bringing up the idea of religion takes away from them feeling like, wow, we're having this discussion again about racism, but it does the job, right? It still allows them to see the importance of having these conversations.
Yeah, and that's what you said about some things with folks who are younger. It can be harder because they may not be ready to get into the real deep cultural issues. But then you can do that through bullying. A lot of the recognition about just being kind and how bullying is a bad thing, those questions can be extrapolated out to bullying people based on how they look. And so if you start to say, oh, because someone's hair is curly or someone has a nose that's shaped different from you, you can't let that be something that creates a barrier. And so that's the real key for younger kids, is to help them understand that not just kindness, but working to be an advocate for people who other students may feel inclined to treat badly.
So I agree, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And like I mentioned before, your Wakanda syllabus and the work that you've been doing, it automatically made me think about the Joker. And folks, if you've tuned in before, you've heard me discuss the Joker. I've also created tons of activities about the Joker, right? So here you have it. This person who is being, I would use the word tortured, right? Who's had a rough upbringing. He's mentally challenged. And all of a sudden he starts to create or commit crimes. And sometimes people look at it as he's a villain. And so I asked students before, is he a hero or a villain? And what constitutes being a villain, right? We never look at our actions and the impact that it has on a person until that person explodes, literally. So what's your take on it, Walter?
So no, that's a huge part of the work I do, and you see what I do online. It's hugely about these stories that we tell and taking different perspectives on the mythologies and the comics, the cinematic films that we encounter, where it's very easy to kind of imagine yourself as Captain America or Tony Stark, but then getting into the humanity of the people that is often isolated and are cast astray as they're just out of line, and so the Joker is the archetypical American villain, is this kind of force of chaos who must be controlled, must be incarcerated. And it causes all of these problems about how that allegory is read onto actual people. And so the film The Joker tries to get us to see what produces that kind of reaction. How do people make a series of bad choices and commit to a life that really puts them on the outside of our social contract, of the society? And I think, I'll fall back on the Wakanda Syllabus because everybody has seen Black Panther. Eric Killmonger is not that character. Like, we begin the story with him talking to his father and then seeing his father killed, and him, the apprehension, the horror that something terrible has happened to him as a small child. And so Ryan Coogler structures that story for us to sympathize with the quote unquote villain and to question who the hero is. And should we be celebrating people who stand by and let bad things happen? And so I think we're at a place in American society, and we've been evolving in it for about 20 years, where we question simple stories about everybody's good or everybody's bad. And we start to see the shades of gray that let us all be fuller human beings.
Oh, I'm over here excited. So if you just see me nodding my head, it's because I can't really talk over you. But that actually brings me into another resource. So D. Lanier developed Solving Time, right? And the idea is that it is a problem-based learning and thinking activity where you're asking students to explain a solution to a real-world problem. As you can see, I have the equity deck, guys. If you don't have yours, get yours. And I'm so happy that you talked about the Wakanda syllabus, because when you think about Wakanda or when you think about Black Panther, there's so many issues, right? You have colonialism, you have sexism, you have racism. And what D. Lanier did was, if you think about the idea of racism, it's an inequity, right? And so even I would suggest this kind of resource, because you could actually have students identify and summarize a real world problem like racism and come up with a solution for it. And so what I would even say is provide activities for students that engages them in having open conversations. And so to dig a little deeper before we actually go, because I'm looking at the time, this teacher it was 28 students who were white and one student who was Black in the classroom. And the way I read it was almost as the adult, I wish you would have stood up, because you had that one student who's Black who's probably saying, dag, my teacher didn't say anything, So and I'm just speaking because I don't really know the rest of the story, but just think about, how important that moment is for us to have these conversations with students when things happen, because you never know if that one student who was making a mockery out of racism, if that was their cry for help. You never know if that was almost like I wish my teacher really had this discussion, because that is probably the norm at home, but I don't want that to be the norm for the rest of my life. So do you have any closing remarks for me, Walter? I know I'm just talking away.
No, this is beautiful. And I hope we can do more of these conversations. This is one of the best uses of my time. Thank you. I certainly support your entire perspective on that. When students can work on collaborative solutions and find ways to kind of work as teams on really difficult and troubling ideas, that's when they get a memorable learning experience. They're transformed and they move forward stronger, more enthusiastic to engage even tougher topics going forward. So no, as teachers, we got to step into those moments and embrace them and empower the entire class to support each other.
Yes, and empowerment. Remember that our students are looking at us as motivators. They want to sometimes see themselves up there in front of the classroom or online on a computer. And so as educators, we have to take every single opportunity possible to not only cultivate an environment that's equitable, but respectful. And so even though you have 28 white students in your classroom and that one Black student, just think about how isolated that one Black student probably feels on a daily basis. And so take every opportunity to, you know, make sure that kids are, like you said, empowered, right? Amplify their voices, create activities where they could come together and actually do group work. And I know I heard you say that before, Walter, you know, having opportunities for group work, planning solutions. So what I would say as well is check out Langston League. Erica does a great job at taking different words and allowing students to connect it to pop culture, right? I know, Walter, I saw one of your videos and you talked about Afro futuristic or futurism. And, you know, that idea and looking at, you know, different videos and different movies and what that means for African Americans. And so what I would say is thank you for today. I cannot wait to do this again.
But I just was add one little brief thing. My first book is called Path to Freedom, and it's a model for how students can tell their own stories about their families and communities so that they feel empowered, that they have a unique contribution to make. So if anybody wants to think about modeling students telling their own stories, definitely pick up Path to Freedom.
So in other words, pick it up, pick it up. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, guys. See you for episode 5 next week.